From the earliest times, leaders have been concerned about their public image. In the past century or so, mass media have helped mold those perceptions and misperceptions 1,000-fold. Today, the masters of communication understand the power of mass media and their ability to inform and persuade.
Friends die from drinking, and drinking and driving can kill a friendship.
Public relations happen any time an individual or an institution wants to influence public attitudes, and that's always. So we, who are consumers, who are voters, who are citizens, are on the receiving end of a lot of attempts to influence the way we see the world. And those attempts, generally, are exercised upon us by public relations practitioners.
It's how organizations communicate with their publics. So really, public relations should probably be called publics relationships, because it's how an organization relates to its different publics, beginning with its own employees and then working outward, let's say, to all of the people who, in today's parlance, are known as stakeholders in an organization.
The Kodak Advantix film cassette is truly the heart, soul, and the mind of this new system.
The history of public relations really goes back to the dawn of civilization, because public relations is fundamentally any time someone is an intermediary between the people who want to be better known and understood and the people who they believe ought to better know them and understand them.
If you think historically, way back historically, that the Gospels in biblical time were an example of how the good, so-called good news was spread about Christianity. And it's classic. It spread a religion as fast as anything could be spread.
Cicero tells us that the first people who practiced what we would recognize as public relations were two fellows in the 5th century BC Greece named Corax and Tisias on the Greek island of Syracuse, which is now Sicily. Corax and Tisias went into business after a revolution when tyrants had seized property. And after the tyrants were thrown out, they set themselves up to help people who wanted to get their property back. So they helped them in a couple of ways. One, they wrote speeches for them. Number two, they spoke on their behalf to the people in power. And number three, they wrote manuals on how to answer difficult questions in order to get your property back. Well, if you look at those three functions, those are three of the classic functions that anyone practicing public relations today would know.
Even in the early history of the United States, public relations was instrumental in shaping the colonialist opinion toward Mother England.
The committees of correspondence in the American Revolution were essentially public relations cells intended to get the word out about independence and to rally public opinion about the coming revolution.
The classic campaign that was waged by propagandists to get the colonists to believe that they should be separated from Great Britain. I mean, that was a long 20, 25, 30-year campaign of the propagandists, continually using events like the Boston Tea Party. Those were events that were exploited to give a drama and heightened tension to the situation, and were used to convince the colonists that the revolution was inevitable.
The Federalist Papers, which were themselves published in newspapers as editorials eliciting people to support the new Constitution and the Bill of Rights to the Constitution, subsequently were themselves recognizable to anybody in public relations today as part of the classic public relations function.
The spread of mass circulation newspapers and wired communication in the 19th century began to heighten the need for good public relations in molding public opinion.
Now, as mass communication grew up, it became possible then to publicize, to get information out to the public, and you needed people to do that. So that was the rise of the so-called publicist, or the information specialist.
The railroads were the first companies to hire independent counselors to help with public relations and stave off unwanted regulation from the newly formed Interstate Commerce Commission. Among the earliest of these counselors to establish a public relations agency was Ivy Lee. He wrote a declaration of principles of what the field of public relations should be. Straight talk and honest representations were at the core of his ideals. During World War I, President Woodrow Wilson recognized the importance of influencing public opinion by forming the Committee on Public Information. On this committee was Edward Bernays, a pioneer of public relations who realized that if the public could be sold on war, they could be sold on anything.
Edward L. Bernays happens to be a personal hero of mine, although I've never met the man. He is considered to be the father of modern public relations. He was the first person who called himself a public relations counselor, and he essentially revolutionized the way that people thought about influencing public opinion. He wrote a book back in 1923 called Crystallizing Public Opinion, which became one of the touchstones of contemporary public relations.
In fact, Edward Bernays was the first person to coin the term public relations counsel, meaning a person who advised other people on how to develop their relationships with different publics. He is important for a number of reasons, though, in that he did develop quite a few of the techniques of public relations that are still used today. For example, he was one of the first to apply psychological principles to public relations tactics.
Bernays' definition of public relations was the following. Public relations is the vocation of the social scientist who advises clients on the actions to take in order to influence public attitudes. Now, nowhere in there does he talk about the press, nowhere in there does he talk about communications, because what public relations is, at its essential, what we do best, is act as a kind of applied anthropologist. What we do is we study very carefully the social and power relationships within groups and among groups, and then we advise our clients on the actions to take to influence those relationships in order to achieve desired outcomes. Now, Bernays was a master of that.
Bernays' first major public relations campaign was for the tobacco industry, which was seeking to change public opinion and open new markets.
One of Edward Bernays' most famous PR programs that he ever conducted was for American Tobacco, for Lucky cigarettes. And what he was trying to do is make it possible for women to smoke in public. At that time, which was the 1920s, it was very common for women to smoke, but not in public.
Bernays recognized that it was not enough to communicate to women, buy our cigarettes, because there was a category problem. The category problem was women were not comfortable smoking in public, and society was not comfortable having women smoke in public. So Bernays did something quite extraordinary. He said, okay, if the women smoking is a problem, let's change society and make it fashionable. So he found ways to have glamorous people photographed with cigarettes in their hands, smoking, and pretty soon, if you wanted to be seen to be de rigueur, you were seen holding a cigarette in your hand.
During World War II, public relations